I forgot to record your introduction. You can see your screen.
Yeah, you can see the screen now.
Yes, we can see the screen. Just I suggest everyone please mute your Zoom because we are hearing a lot of background noise. And if you wish to, you can put your video off as well. Over to you, Uday.
Yeah. So I'll just start. First, anyway, FD has already talked about I retired in 2018. But before that, I'll just go on and mention how things started. So in terms of photography, I mean wildlife photography as well as general photography. I had a digital camera as such for a long time, maybe 2000, 2001 when I had been to the US for the first time. But DSLR, I got it in 2011. That was the entry level Canon 1100D. Again, I mean, that time there was absolutely no birding or wildlife in mind. It was purely for family photography, or whenever you go out on outings, you take photographs. But more so, I like the technology, basically gadgets. So the physics of it, or how the light works, and those sort of things. That's why I bought the camera. So that was my primary idea. Plus, the other thing that I realized was it's a good medium for me to express, because by nature I don't like to talk much. So this is a good medium by which I can communicate. I can share photos, and that's easy for me to communicate rather than actually doing the talk. From 2007, I mean, I got retired in 2018, but 2017 I started going for photography tours. So basically going with like-minded people and joining them to learn, understand. Again, I didn't have the current camera gear at that time, but I had upgraded at least the camera.
आवाज गेला.
Hello, can you hear?
Yes, we can hear Uday. There is some
Yeah,
echo.
so you could. Okay.
Yeah, just we could maybe last one sentence we lost, but we are getting echo from you as somebody. I think just I will figure out.
Maybe I'll just ask Deepa to switch, put off her mic. You go on mute. Okay.
Very good. Now we can.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so yeah, what I was saying was in 2018 I retired, but just before that, 2017, when the monsoon session, basically that's when the macro season starts. That's when I started going on photography tours. So that's typically when I started. So close to 3 years now when I started. So this photo, can you see a photo now? Wait, I think it will take some time for it to appear on your screens. I can see it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. This is from my first trip to Fansad. It was a macro trip, and again, I didn't have macro lens or anything at that time. That's obviously why the reason, because I'm behind and taking these photographs rather than actually
some
taking
people
the
are
object.
waiting. Why don't you let them in?
I'm doing it. I'm monitoring it. I'm doing it.
Okay. Okay.
There is nobody waiting now.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So this is what basically people are. You might be curious what the people are actually photographing. Some of you who are familiar with macro may have some idea, but for others, I'll just show you what they are photographing. It's a western banded gecko. Can you see that? Yeah, and it's a typical pose that, again, I mean, this photograph I have taken in a subsequent trip when I had the macro lens, not that trip. But just to show what they were photographing, this is what I've shown. If you see the tongue is out here, can you see my cursor?
Yes, Uday.
Yeah, so the, I mean, whatever, good part or natural part is such that these don't have eyelids. So anytime there is some cleanup required, maybe a raindrop or even dust or whatever, the only way they can clean it is use the tongue. So that's what typically the macro photographers were interested in photographing, the moment when the tongue is out to clean the eye. So that is what the photograph is. Okay. Now coming to, 2017, as I said, I started with that 80D camera. Then I quickly realized that I need to get macro lens as well, because if I want to go for macro photography, and that's where gradually I realized this list starts small. First started with the camera, then okay, the lens that you see here is obviously not the macro lens. This is for budding lens, but lenses basically, it's not just one lens. I'm trying to say there are multiple lenses that you keep needing. Then you need flash, then you need camera bags. Actually, I'll say bags because this bag is not enough to hold my birding lens. It is for the macro. Typically for birding you will need bigger bag. Then with all these costly equipments, you need that dry cabinet. This is basically a cabinet which maintains the humidity or reduces the humidity in terms of what it does. It's like a fridge, small fridge, but more than temperature control, it controls the humidity. So all the equipments when not in use is kept over here, so that the fungus problems and all are reduced. I'll say it's not completely removed, but yeah. So that's what it is. Again, I mean, this list that I've shown is only again, it will not be complete list. There would be few other things also that we'll keep on adding. For example, you need monopod, and you need tripod, and so on and so forth. The list still is never ending actually. And this is about the hardware part. But besides that, you also need the software for cataloging as well as for processing. For example, I've been doing it only for 3 years, but there are people who have been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years. It would be impossible for them to always remember a particular photo taken from which location or for which species, etc., etc. So it's better to have a catalog. So that is another thing that you need to have. For example, I'm using the Adobe Lightroom as the cataloging. It is quite time consuming activity. Plus you also need a lot of backups. Any hard disk, I mean, if you keep the data only on hard disk, that's a risk, because the hard disk can conk off anytime. It can stop working suddenly. So you need to have backups as well, and that's a regular activity, because after every trip you do the cataloging, you decide which photos to keep, you delete whatever unwanted thing, and then take backups. So all that is actually a time consuming activity. So after a trip, typically at least 1 week goes into all this back end work, and still it is not complete, because now I'm realizing during this lockdown period I'm utilizing it to clear off all my previous trips, and still I'm at 2018, so 2019 still to go. Okay, now coming to the next part, when I started photography, the question that I had was, what do I want to shoot? Again, I had not, okay, just before somebody had actually earlier raised that question, retire and why retire early or whatever. So when I took the retirement, I had not really planned that I'll be doing this kind of photography or this kind. Hello, can you hear?
Uday, go ahead.
There's some
Uday.
disturbance. Yeah, so some disturbance. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead. We'll take care of it.
Okay. Yeah. So that time the idea wasn't fully conceptualized that I'll be doing this, but my main idea is that I wanted to come out of that rat race. I mean, I was not very happy doing just for money. So rather, I thought probably there are too many things that I can do, and then I can concentrate on. So that's where it started. But before that, 2017, I started going for photography too. So little inclination was there towards it. 2018, when I took that call, and finally 2018 April onwards, I was completely free. The choice that I had to make was what to photograph. So there were 3 categories that I got primarily interested in. Okay, just before that, the photograph that you see in the background here is from Sundarbans. So you basically move on boats, and this is one of the fishing boats. Of course, you don't move in these kind of boats. The boats that you go in is a nice one-story type of a boat where 3-4 people can stay as well. Okay. So first category was macro. Again, I'm not getting too much technical details, but by macro, what I mean is basically extreme portraits, so to say, for small insects, reptiles, those sort of things. But the technical definition is such that if you look at the camera sensor, the objects is one-to-one represented on the or focused onto the sensor. So for example, sensor, typically a full frame camera sensor is 36 mm by 24 mm. So the object, if it is obviously if it is lesser than that, the entire one-to-one mapping happens on that, and therefore image that you see in the photograph is much bigger than even the object actually. So I'll just show you few of my micro clicks.
Uday,
Yeah,
let me
these
just
are
interrupt.
Yeah.
People are saying if you possible, explain the settings. Tell us the settings also to one or two pictures when you are showing them, if possible.
Oh,
Otherwise, we
okay.
can take them later on also.
That's fine. So if somewhere I feel probably it is required, then or it becomes obvious, then I'll explain. Else maybe through questions. The only thing is that I'm seeing only the screen here, not the chat. So
No problem.
excuse
Don't
me
worry.
if there's a
Don't
delay.
worry about it. You
That's
just
fine.
concentrate on that though. Yeah.
That's fine. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The first photograph that we see here is the a butterfly at Tawny Coaster. This is from Ovalekarwadi Butterfly Garden in Thane. Again, typically for macro, the important setting to use is the f that we use. For most of the wildlife photographs that we use, it's 4, 5.6, 8, that sort of thing. Maximum is 8. Here it starts itself at 11, 13, and so on and so forth, because these are all small objects. You want to get as much object in focus as possible. That's the idea. Second one here is a lynx spider. See, typically when we go for wildlife photography, we want to see a lot of action. So for example, a deer being caught by a tiger or a leopard, that becomes a action photo. At macro level also there is a lot of action, and that action keeps on happening close to us, actually very near to us. Any garden you go, typically you will see some macro objects here and there. This is one case where that blue banded bee is being caught by a lynx spider. So it happened in front of us when we were photographing, and typically the macro photographs are taken when you are just 5 or 6 inches from the object. And for most of these things, you use flash. So for good macro photography, flash is a must, because typically these are all below some leaf, or typically in the rainy season. So there is hardly any light. So you need flash. And you need flash also because you keep F numbers as 13, 15, 18, even more some cases. So there's hardly any light coming in through the camera, natural light coming in through the camera. Okay. Third one is a wine snake. This we had taken in Nagla, close to Mumbai. It's actually a juvenile of a wine snake, and for some reason it was really agitated that day. So that's where you can see that fang showing clearly the inner parts as well. Okay. The macro world is completely amazing. If you see the photo that I'm showing here, it's an elephant weevil. It's a weevil or type of insects. There are multiple weevils. There are elephant weevils, there are giraffe weevils, and that the name comes because of that elephant-like trunk. I mean, it's not exactly like elephant, but the trunk portion is giving it the name of elephant weevil. And these are all very small objects, not even a centimeter in length, or maybe 2 centimeters, some of them 1 or 2 centimeters. That's the length that they are. So it becomes actually very difficult for us to even identify where they are hiding. Okay, here this is a long horned beetle. I mean, if you see the horns, they're so big compared to the body, almost 3-4 times the size of the body it is. And it's on a leaf. You actually see the small hair-like structures on the leaf as well. Last one here is a robber fly. As the name suggests, it actually robs. It just waits in ambush and then suddenly jumps on the prey. Here if you see, it's a honeybee that it had caught. Again, for all these photographs, flash has been used. The only thing is that I am using a very primary kind of flash, just the external flash that I had shown earlier in the picture. But people are using very sophisticated flashes here. So they use more than flash. There's something called as diffuser, which diffuses the light. There's a light, but diffuse light. Here, if you see, there are a lot of shadows. So that's not the best picture. For good picture you need to be all parts illuminated but there is no shadow. That's what it should be. So macro was the first category that I was interested in. Second, of course, birding, or probably more important for me or more interesting area for me is birding. Mainly because bird trails you keep seeing, I mean, bird you keep seeing everywhere in the city as well. Three types of birding typically that I got involved in: trails around city, forest birding, as typically all of us are birders here, so probably people know. Third is hide or studio photography. Some of you have gone to Nandu's place as well, so that kind of stuff wherein you remain hidden and the birds are in the open. But so that kind of a setup is a hide or a studio. I'll show some of the bird photographs as well here. First one is a Woody cave. Again, this is from Chiplun Nandu's place. It's a male Woody cave. Then you have a juvenile crested hawk eagle. This is from Pench. Again, I'm just going through all these pictures. If I see across a specific setting, then I'll mention. But otherwise, these are various settings that I use. If there is a story behind it, I'll just explain that as well. So, for example, here if you see the crested kingfisher, this was from Sattal. And the story for this is actually Sattal. We went. The primary intention was to do studio photography because there are so many studios in Sattal, and the bird variety that you get to see at the studio itself or at the hide itself is quite a large. This bird again never comes on any of the hides. For this you have to do forest birding. But it so happened that we had started from Kathgodam and we had not even reached our destination. On the way itself, our driver pointed us to a bird. It was the this kingfisher, and we were zapped. I mean, it was much bigger compared to the other kingfishers that we see. So obviously that attracted us. Plus the crest, it was, and in that nice cold Himalayan weather, it looked so beautiful. So we just asked him to stop. Although the roads are small, you don't hardly have any space there. But we asked him to park aside, and then we just got down. We got down, and we actually it was near a small lake sort of structure. So we kept on going behind it till the time we got this photograph. I mean, we ran almost for half a kilometer, and then must be 30-40 minutes we spent in that, because every time we were not able to see it in such clear with a such clear background. Every time it was through some a lot of kadi kudi, as we say. It was through that, but luckily here we got it, and that's when we stopped and came back to the vehicle. This one here is a shikra. Shikra obviously we keep seeing, but one peculiar thing about that you see over here is it is actually lying in a small pond of water. This is from Ranthambore. Temperatures were around or actually more than 45 degrees that afternoon. So even the birds must be feeling the heat. To beat that, it was just lying in this pool, private pool, you can say. Actually, it was on the road itself. So we stopped, we waited for it to go pass by, and then we crossed the road. Okay, this is the crane from Africa. Nice structure on its head. It really looks, it's nice. When typically these birds go in small group, 2, 3, 4. So and although all wild birds, animals are shy, but in Africa you get to see them relatively at a closer distance. So they don't run away if you are in a jeep. Last one is a tawny eagle. That eagle has actually made a kill. So what happened was, it was evening time, almost we were closing the day when we saw the eagle. So we waited there. It suddenly made a flight. It went somewhere, caught some small bird, or we couldn't understand actually what it was, but caught it, and it is. If you see it closely, it's actually there at its legs. And third category was obviously mammals. So maybe sometimes you can. I mean, I've said zoo here, Primarily because there are zoos where it is not caged. The mammals are not caged. It is a much bigger area. For example, if you have anybody if you seen Singapore Zoo, the area allotted to each of the mammal is large. So relatively, they are free in that. Of course, it is still a zoo or a captured animal. It's not wild, but people can do photography over there as well. If it comes to India, typically if you go for any of the safaris, it's all tiger centric. So even the guides, drivers interested in showing you the tigers, and most of the people also are interested in only in seeing the tiger. So if the tigers are seen, then the trip is successful. If it is not, then the trip is dry, so to say. But I mean, there's a funny incident. Once we were in Bandhavgarh, and the driver here, our driver was supposed to be best for tracking tigers, or not just that, he was so good to give right angles for photography, so on and so forth. So basically, he'll push the vehicle to the boundaries, make sure that you get the right angle, etc., etc. But he was so keen on only showing tigers that he had absolutely no interest in showing any bird or anything else. To the extent that we actually kept on telling him it's okay, even if you don't see tigers, any bird, anything else, it's fine. He was not waiting. So then he said, okay, fine, you don't show it. If we see a bird, just stop when we are telling you. He started saying, sir, क्या बोलूं मैं आपको, पंछी दिखता है तो मुझे नींद आती है. That's what he said. So that's what his reaction was. And most of the drivers, guides are like that. Maybe also because people expect them to be that way, or a lot of times people give them tips if the tigers are seen. So that's typically the scene. Here are some of the photographs. I'll just wherever possible, I'll just telling you some story behind it, the photo. Again, if you think it's too much of it, then you can just tell me. I'll just keep showing only the photographs. This one is from Bandhavgarh, the Bamera son. The tiger's father was Bamera. Hello.
Go ahead.
Somebody saying something? Yeah, okay.
Go ahead. Somebody joined now. I'll mute.
Okay. So the story behind this tiger was that actually we were in the morning safari. This was our last safari in Bandhavgarh, and we had heard calls. So based on that, we were tracking, and after a lot of struggle, actually almost an hour struggle, we saw something running parallel with us. That was this tiger, not running, actually, it was walking. So we kept on walking as it was running parallel. We were not sure where it's going to cross the road. But luckily our guide had some idea. So he, at a particular point, he asked he asked the driver to wait. And soon enough, the tiger actually approached towards our side. So we could see the head-on tiger here.
May I request you to stop now, because time is over, and everybody please re-log in again and maintain the same discipline. Mute your audio and disable your video. Okay, so please join again, same credential, same username, password link. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start.
I'll just come back to the same slide first and then start. Yeah, okay. Just starting with a scene in Africa. You see here two of the largest mammals that you see on Earth. The one is large. I mean, one is the heaviest. One is the tallest. The interesting part of the story was in this scene we were seeing 3-4 giraffes. The elephant was not there for quite some time. And then suddenly from one corner, actually it walked in, and it didn't walk straight the way it is going now. It actually took few steps towards the giraffe, as if like showing I'm the king here, or I own this place type. So the giraffe took 2 steps back. That's it. That satisfied probably the elephant, and then it continued its walk. Very interesting thing that we observed there. There was no noise anywhere. They didn't make any noise. It's just that few steps towards the direction of the giraffe, and then it started walking back. Third scene here, we were actually fortunate for us, unfortunate for the warthog, but the kill happening in front of us. Actually, it was alive. The warthog was alive when we saw, and the lioness was pulling it with so much force. If you see here, all the other pride members, they're tugging along. They're just trying to eat or take out portions from the body, and this lioness was actually pulling the warthog along with all of this ensemble. Everybody was getting pulled, sort of. So much force that she was generating. Okay, this one is from Ranthambore again. You see little bit of different pose here. It was as if like she was seeing through us. What had happened was we were at a corner, and then she was sitting there. Suddenly she saw a deer, sambar deer, behind us. I mean, we didn't realize what she was looking. So it was appeared as if she was just looking through us. So that's where we looked back. We saw a sambar deer, which is far. I mean, not nearby, but it was far off. And even the sambar deer was alert. So that's where it didn't take any further action, because obviously it knew if it tried to move or any chase, the sambar deer will run away. But that created that scene. And in fact, interesting part was that if you see a twig here, for most part when we were photographing her, the twig was right in front of her face. Luckily, because she saw the deer, she moved, and that's where we were able to take this photograph. This is Krishna from Ranthambore, just for records. Okay, this is again from Africa. Leopard and two cubs. I mean, leopard mother and two cubs. They passed by us through grass, and then they went up a hill. This is okay. Most of these photos that you see, these are all zoomed pictures. Actual picture, I mean, actually they are at quite some distance. It's just that to see it clearly, normally we crop the picture and then show only the interesting part. This is again a hyena. There was some kill made either by the hyenas or by a lion pride or something of a wildebeest, and it was running with that just the horn. So maybe it had its portion of eat or feel in the night. This was early morning scene, so we just running away with that. Now, in terms of basic preparations, okay, just before that, this photograph that you see here is again from Sattal. So you see the mountain range behind, and it's a nice view. I mean, besides birds, even the Himalayan landscape is really nice to get to see there. So coming to the basic preparations for photography, this is again, I mean, I'm really not an expert, but in terms of whatever I have learned in the last 2-3 years, some hard way, some from the expert that I keep moving around with, to first understand the habitat that you are going to go. For example, typically in Mumbai, we go to Bandu pumping station. It's a mangrove area, and you see a lot of mosquitoes typically in the morning hours, first few hours when it is little dark. I've seen people coming there in shorts and half sleeves t-shirts, and then probably for the entire birding session they are only worried about the mosquitoes and nothing else. So if you're not aware of what habitat that you're getting in, it could become a problem. Sometimes footwear is also quite important. For example, macro photography tools, if you would have seen, typically we go in dense bushes or a lot of grass and all. There are snakes around, there are scorpions around, so it's better to have a right kind of footwear, not just any slippers or anything of that sort. That is quite important. Plus, some cases you also have to worry about the leeches or ticks. Again, there is no solution to avoid them completely, but it's just that if you are aware, then you are better prepared. That's all. And be aware, because there could be a lot many other things that if you don't know, then you will not be prepared for it. So, for example, there is in Africa, I had at least not heard about the tsetse fly, and people want that the tsetse fly could be really dangerous. Plus, one more thing, the local hotel owner told us was that they're apparently attracted towards blue color. So basically, if you're wearing anything blue, you are likely to have more bites. So such kind of things, obviously, if you are aware, then you will be prepared in a better way. Next is the understanding subject or the category that we are looking for. So, for example, when we go for bird photography, we should be aware that there are times when see more birds at times when you don't see any birds. For example, the same locations that you keep going on any shore or any beach, suddenly you see one day there are so many birds, one day you don't see anything. So it is important to understand this is also linked to the high and low tides for the shore birds typically, not the forest birds. When it is high tide, the birds have lesser area to actually roam around on the beaches. So therefore, it is easier for us to find them near us. Similarly, there are breeding times. So typically, birds will have different breeding plumage. So if you see them in that season, you will see it differently. Just look at this photograph here. There's a Baya weaver and the red munia. Okay? So typically, when anybody sees pictures shared on social media, this is what they see. So Baya weaver and the munia, all in brightly colored breeding plumage. But if you go in a month where this breeding plumage is not there, they're non-breeding, they'll see completely different. So for example, if you see these two bird itself, can you see the picture? Yeah. Now this picture is when they are not in the breeding mode. So in fact, if you are so used to seeing that complete red colored munia, you may find it difficult to even identify it's the same bird. So if you're aware that they have such kind of differentiation, then that becomes much easier. Okay, here this picture, as you see, this is from Vigwan, the black-tailed godwits that you see in large number. This happens almost through the entire migration period. But if you go when the migration is over, say for example, if you go in May or June, you won't see the same set of birds. So idea is basically you should be aware where you're going, what's the right season for that particular thing. It's a mammal. Typically for mammals or tigers, people go in summers mainly because summer there's a water shortage. Most of the places, most of our jungles, there's a water shortage. So the tigers have lesser choice for water bodies. For example, in a lot of our jungles, there are forest departments have made the water sources, small water sources, ponds or something, and then that they keep filling. So using tractors, they keep filling it regularly. So those are the areas where the tigers are very likely to go. Not just tigers, even other mammals. All mammals are depending on water all through the 12 months. So here, since the water bodies are less, it is very likely that you will see them at a few locations, 2-3 locations. So they're not spread all over the jungle. So the percentage or the likelihood of sighting is much better in summers. Typically, if you go in a winter, it is unlikely that you would see tigers or sloth bears and any of the other mammals. At the same time, if you go typically in summer, but in places like Ranthambore, you would see completely dry grass. So some people want to see tiger with a lush green background. So you will not be able to see it in Ranthambore then. I mean, in those summer period then. So you should be aware that there are these are the things that you need to take care of. So if you are going with certain idea, you then better go at the right season. Similarly for insects, I mean the macro part, the insects are much larger in number typically during the monsoon period because again, I mean this is all natural cycle. Most of the local birds that we have in India, they have their breeding time typically during our monsoon period. So their food requirements are more, and it's so adjusted accordingly by the nature that a lot of insects are also the number of insects also increases during that time. So it coincides and the birds get better food choices. So if you are aware that you see this insects are more the macro season typically during monsoon, then that's the time you utilize for that. Again, ideally it works good for all wildlife photographers is because typically during the monsoon period, you can't go for mammals. I'll not say can't go for birding, but the chances of going for birding during that period are much lesser. So you rather utilize that time to do macro photography. So for the monsoon period, you do that and then start your birding and mammals. So it like the calendar spread out perfectly well. At least that's what I have seen in the last 2-3 years. Okay. I'm just coming to bird photography. Here I'm not getting too much of details into how do you track the bird movement, you should be aware, etc., etc., because most of the people here are from that background. So those kind of basic details I'm not getting into. Instead, I'll just show certain photographs that I found interesting, and then some settings related to that. First picture I'm going to show is of scops owls in Ranthambore, but this is not from the Ranthambore jungle, but the resort that we were staying. So we were aware that in the resort there's a family of scops owl located somewhere in that vicinity within the campus itself in the bamboo thickets. Luckily, on our first morning, this was 5:30 a.m. So it was dark still, and we found them. So it was, there were actually 5 of them. By the way, this is a picture you see. It's only 2, one juvenile and one adult, but there were 2 adults and 3 juveniles. So possibly a family of 5, and they were in the deep bamboo thickets. But luckily, this frame I could see those 2 relatively clearly. That's why I've shown it here. Again, as I said, this was 5:30 a.m. So light, there was hardly any light. So this photograph is at 4000 ISO. So because just to cover light. Again, one mistake that I did that time, luckily it didn't turn out that way in the photograph, is the shutter speed that I got was some 1 by 30 seconds, 1 by 40 seconds. And that's a handheld photo. You don't normally do that kind of stuff, because at 1 by 30, 1 by 40, you're likely to have shake in the picture. But luckily here it worked. Maybe it was in burst mode, so out of 2 3 one of them was good, or just purely my luck. But yeah, that's the kind of thing, because the problem is that at that light, even with 4000 5000 ISO, you hardly get any meaningful shutter speed. So, but that's what you have to do with, because that they are, again, we had tried to see them during the day. We didn't see them there; they were hidden inside. It's only during that morning and the next morning. Both mornings we could see them, but only at the morning time. So that was the only time we could photograph them.
Uday, there was one question. I'll ask it now because the opportunity is correct. If there are twigs or grass in front of the subject, how do you focus better? Any idea?
Yeah, see, the thing that you use typically for all my birding trips as well as mammals, I go with single point, the spot focus, as you call it. So focus is just the center point typically, and that's where I use, because again, I'll just show one example little later. Somewhere I have that example of seeing through the bushes and the leaves and what you can get. But the most important point is, if you rely on your autofocus that you have typically on the point and shoot cameras, it will have multiple points to focus, and then the camera decides which point to focus on. So that's where there's a problem. If you have the control, you can set that single point, point it right at the animal or bird, and then take the photo. So single point is what works in majority of the cases. Again, if it is too much in the too much of portion is hidden, then hardly you can do anything about it. I mean, that's it. You just observe it. That's all. Don't worry about photograph. Is that okay? Sorry, I mean, I'm not seeing the screen, so
no, that perfectly. Go ahead. That was just a question related, so hence I asked. Wherever you can see that particular option, you show us that.
Sure, fine. Okay, these are blue bearded bee-eaters. I mean, I really like this thing because one is juvenile, one is adult. I don't think I need to tell this group of people which is juvenile and which are adult. But the idea, I mean, or I got interested in this because even the juveniles, you see that blue beard portion so nicely. So that's obviously gets the name for the bird. But the juvenile, the part of a photograph, the juvenile part is from Dhamapur, Konkan, Maharashtra, and the right side one is from Bandhavgarh actually. And the juvenile one, when I've seen for the first time, that was a juvenile only, and I had only heard about the bee-eater that we see typically, the green bee-eater. Somebody said, "Oh, this is blue bearded bee-eater." I was like, "Zap, what kind of bird it is?" And then luckily, little later, that juvenile actually was sitting on a branch. It was partly hidden by another branch, and behind that, the parent actually was feeding it. So I have one photograph of that as well, but that parent or the adult is not completely seen, so that's why I've not kept it here. But if anybody is interested, I can show that photograph later. So, so this is that blue-bearded bee eaters. Then another incidence. This I'm talking about the normal, the green bee eaters, which is obviously very common. But the uncommon thing here was that we could see them in large numbers. This is in Velavdar. So we were staying in Bhavnagar and going towards Velavdar. And on the again, this was very early morning, 6 o'clock, 6:30. Light had just started showing a little bit the sun. And while we were walking, the expert with us suddenly asked the driver to stop. And by the time he told the driver and the driver stopped, we had already gone some 100, 200 meters ahead. So we had to reverse back and come to the spot to see these things. Okay, there were 24 of them on the wire, 18 on the top and 6 on the wire below. When we actually saw it, there were even more. But by the time we got down, and again, typically the wires are very close to the road, but in this case, they were not. They were quite far. So we had to walk. And again, we had to walk a little cautiously so as not to disturb them, but go as near as possible. Obviously, light was also low, so we had to adjust all that. And then by the time we reached somewhere relatively closer distance, we could take this photograph of 24 birds together. Second, the next one that I'll show is a gray-headed fish eagle. This is again from Dudhwa. And at Dudhwa, in that morning, we were at the watchtower. This Dudhwa watchtower is little different. This is not the typical metal structure that you see most other places. This was a concrete one, and we had chosen that spot for our breakfast. So actually, we were having breakfast there when suddenly somebody pointed us towards the Dudhwa per se. I mean, I talked about Ranthambore in April, May when it's all dry grass. No? This again is in April, May, but it is still completely lush green. So Dudhwa, being close to Himalaya, it's evergreen. So all 12 months you go, typically you see this such kind of green grass. And some of the grass, as they call it, elephant grass, is so tall that hardly upper portion of elephants is seen only through that. Okay, so coming back to this picture, somebody saw some action at one corner. Again, this is a cropped picture, so you see very clearly, but actually when you see it through the eyes, it was very far. And it had caught something, so it looked like some fish or eel, something of that sort. So that got us interested. So we took some photograph, but it didn't remain there for long. Within 2 minutes, it flew. And then it flew, but it appeared that again it flew with that kill. It appeared that it is probably not going too far, must be going somewhere in the nearby trees. So I decided then to go behind it to get better photographs. Luckily, one other participant was ready to come. So 2 of us and then driver. Remaining our other members remained at the breakfast. They didn't come with us. So we went down, and luckily for us, within 100 meters or so, we actually see the right portion that you see. It was perched relatively empty. This particular window was relatively open, where we could see the bird, as well as if you see the catch, the fish that it had caught in its legs, talons. Typically, peafowls you see with the full feathers. It's interesting, so that's why I presented these 2 photographs rather than the full one. Again, I'm going to another set of Scops owls. See here in this picture is from Satpura in Madhya Pradesh. Okay, I mean, I just earlier mentioned the tiger tours and dry safaris. This was one of the dry safaris for us. Satpura, we hardly saw anything in the jungle. I mean, in terms of the mammals, we saw a good sloth bear and mother and baby. So that was one good thing. But okay, one of the trails we were going, and we saw this scops owl. It was only there are two, right? You see, the top one was the only one visible. So we were photographing it, and suddenly after few minutes, the other one popped up from the down. That's, we don't know. I mean, I don't know whether it's a juvenile, probably, but we didn't know whether it's a juvenile and parent. But the second one came so cutely from the bottom that it remained. So basically, that's why I wanted to showcase this photograph. Another owls. I mean, I know probably owls may be my favorite because this is a third set of owls that I'm showing. This is again from Ranthambore. See, the eyes are, I mean, I like these eyes here. In fact, my son, when he saw the one on the right side, this owl, he actually said that you must have photoshopped those eyes there. It can't be real. So that's what his reaction was. But obviously they're real. There's no Photoshop here. This again, I mean, this is photograph is merged together. They're not sitting like this. One was on the upper branch, one was on the lower branch, some few feet away from each other. But again, it was evening light, high ISO, this image as well. But they were constantly looking at us. Ours was the only vehicle there, and so they were constantly looking at us, giving us these nice eyes, perfectly focused on us. I mentioned about the photography earlier in terms of using flashes and all those things. So there are restrictions or there are ethics where you don't use flashes. Typically in India, for birding, we don't use flash, but there are countries in Southeast Asia or even China and all, people, or even Europe for that matter, people use flash and they don't see anything wrong in that. But again, I mean, India, typically we don't use flash. So that's the ethics that we follow. But besides that, we also follow another ethics in terms of not photographing the nest or actual breeding or feeding the chicks. Those sort of photographs we normally don't show. But I've still shown one. I'm just going to show you one photograph here with just the intention. Okay, I'll just show. Let me show the photograph first. Can you see it here now? Okay. See this. I'll not get into location where it was, but I just want, okay, before getting into this, before even getting into my birding days, my idea of a bird nest was it will be somewhere on the tree, or in case of pigeons and house sparrows and all, it might be somewhere in the corner of a house or a building's corner. But it will be safe. It will not be anywhere where somebody can walk over it. But I was surprised actually to see this nest here. See, it's a zoom photo, obviously, so therefore you see the bird clearly. But if you see in that landscape, there is just no way you can make out there's a bird or there's a nest there. In fact, there was a nest, there were eggs as well. If you follow my cursor, is this patch that I'm showing? That is actually a track made by our vehicle. We passed so closely to that bird, but there was no way the driver could have been aware that there's a nest here. Or why I'm showing this photograph only to make everyone aware that in such places also there could be bird nests. So whenever you are moving around in any jungle or any of these such landscapes, you be aware. That's all, just from that point of view. I was told by the trip organizers during the trip not to show this picture anywhere. I'm just showing it for the purpose of making everyone aware that there are nests like this as well, which are in plain view right on the land. I mean, there is absolutely no protection from anywhere. Even a stray dog can kill the bird. Okay. Coming to mammals, the third category that I was interested in. Here I'll try to show what I had said about seeing, say, a mammal or a bird behind bushes or behind trees. So typically, for in case of mammals, and from the photography point of view, these are bigger in size. So obviously, some parameters change from that point of view, the F numbers that you use and all. And most of this photography is done through safari vehicle. You're not I mean, unlikely that you will be on foot. It will be on through safari vehicle only. So you have that limitation while taking photographs, because you can only move in a limited way. Look, I'll just give you the first example here. This is again in Ranthambore. You see, this is exactly the kind of thing that we were seeing, the tiger. It was a male tiger. Typically, those of you who have already been going on these tiger safaris, they know that seeing a female tiger with cubs is relatively common. Seeing a male tiger is little uncommon. Of course, it's not impossible, but it's uncommon. And this was male tiger, T57 from Ranthambore. The driver probably was aware. This again, I mean, you're not able to see the depth of this picture from this photograph, but this was 20-25 feet below, and there was small water stream. So the tiger was, maybe the temperature probably was cooler at that location, so that's why it was peacefully waiting there. And they probably be aware, so they just took us to that spot and then just showed us the tiger. So that's it. The tiger is seen. Now the difficult part, because as somebody put that question earlier, what can you make out? I mean, you can only see there's a tiger there. That's all. Beyond that, there is nothing, no meaningful photograph that you can do. So this is where you probably have to be innovative in addition to having that point focus. So focus on the particular part of the tiger and not on any of the things. So again, I mean, here what I did was I moved around how much ever possible within that jeep itself and try to get a little meaningful photo. So I'll just show that as well to you. See here, this is from the same spot, and you see the blurred portions or the unclear portions. These are all the leaves that you see in the first picture, but the tiger part is relatively clear. This is only possible if you use the single point focus. Now, coming to the second picture, okay, I mean, in typical safaris, this when you go in a season, for example, summer, this is the likely scenario that you have, and you are very lucky if you are somewhere in that first row. It's like getting the last row for movies or first row for the theater or the drama. Invariably you end up somewhere in that somewhere in the back portion itself, and then you have to find your ways not only through the bushes and trees and leaves, but also through the people here or the vehicles there. You keep trying your luck. Sometimes somebody loses patience, they move out, so you get someplace. But here they're all come together, because there's a this is from Bandhavgarh. There is a small cave, and a tigress had made a kill there. So she was sitting there with the kill, but she was sitting. I mean, she was not sleeping, but she was just sitting there. She was not making any movement. People were hoping, and the guides knew that the tigress had 3 cubs, so she had hidden them somewhere. So, but somewhere or the other, since she had made a kill, obviously the cubs will come down. So we were all hoping that they'll come down. Of course, they didn't come while we were there. But this was the tigress that we could see. Again, through people, through a lot of bushes. So you see some blurred portion on all sides. But this was the tigress and the kill that it had made.
Uday, question on this particular one.
Yeah.
Do you prefer to use autofocus mode or manual focus mode?
Most of the time I use autofocus, but a very, very particular. See, the problem what happens is that typically if you're doing a handheld photography, your hand also keeps moving so fast. Fast as in like the movement might not be a big movement, but even small movement. So when you have zoomed in, that small movement also matters a lot. So that's the tricky question. So sometimes you could be better off doing a manual focusing and then focus on. But most of the time I have used autofocus, but a single point focus. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
But you may need manual focus as well. So there are some tricky scenarios wherein the autofocus for whatever reasons won't work. You have to then rely on the manual focus. And okay, coming back to the similar question. So basically, for typically for the vehicles, you use additional accessory, the bean bag, so that steadies your camera to an extent. So here, once that is steadied, then even you can go for manual focus, set it accordingly, and then take photographs after that. On that. I can see a question. Barun is asking back button focus. Yes, other than macro, for all my birding and mammals, I always use only back button focus. And for all mammal photography, the most important factor, whatever settings, whatever that you do, whatever camera that you have, luck is the most important factor. If you are lucky that day, you would see so many tigers, you see deers, you see whatever that you want to see. And there are times when you don't see anything in the jungle. In fact, you start wondering why. I mean, whether there are any animals in the jungle or not. Some days are like that, but that's a fun part. That's what you go to the jungle for, right? Macro photography, as I said earlier as well, the objects are very close for macro, and getting that entire object in focus becomes difficult. That's why you have to go with bigger f numbers. So bigger f numbers, I mean 13, 16. So bigger f number actually means much smaller the shutter opening, and because of that you need the flash.
So do you use shutter parity or manual mode? What
uh,
mode do you use usually? A shutter or
I
aperture parity?
I prefer. I mean, I most of the time since last year or so, I've been only using manual. But prior to that, I was using the aperture priority, and that's I found to be quite good. So when I started at the beginning, aperture priority was the mode that I was using most of the times for macro as well as for other categories. Okay, this picture that you see is the praying mantis, and although the although the mantis looks to be in same plane, but some message. Oh, the zoom. Okay, fine. Awad, we can probably continue for 2 minutes and then we can
Yeah,
drop it.
we'll go in the last minute. We have four,
Yeah,
five
yeah,
minutes.
yeah, that's fine. Okay, fine. So if you see this, although it is a very small portion that we're covering here, still the entire insect is not in focus. Some parts are out of focus and only some parts are in focus. So that's why you need good lighting, good flash, and very important thing here is you have to go with right experts. Why I'm saying so, because typically when you venture in these kind of jungles, you are on foot and you don't know which insects or even trees for that matter are poisonous, could cause allergies. So it's very difficult to move around otherwise. These are the kind of stuff that you photograph in a typical macro photography tool. So you better be going with right experts. We talked about ethics, and sorry, I talked about ethics, and I had mentioned in case of birds, but even for macro, you have this question. So when you are using flash, we are close to that insect. So whether that light is affecting them, how much light can affect them, those are the questions that are there. Besides that, if you see a picture that I'm showing here right now, is a scorpion, and that scorpion has actually caught hold of a moth, and that that catch is primarily because of us, because we were showing a torch light for photography, and that moth unfortunately got attracted to the torch light, became easy prey for the scorpion. So somebody might say, I mean, ethically it is we have made an easy catch for the scorpion, and the moth lost his life. But yeah, I mean, those are the questions that will always be there in any photography, the ethical issues. And I don't have any right or wrong answers. So I typically, whenever I go on trips, I follow the experts, go by their judgment guidance. That's where I was showing the bird picture earlier, the bird nest. The experts there told us not to share this photograph anywhere on the social media. So that's where I've not published or showed it anywhere on the social media. Just during this presentation, I wanted to show a specific scenario. That's why I shared it.
Uday, we will pause here. We will
Yeah.
stop here and we'll rejoin. Everybody, please rejoin. Uday, you can actually keep your PPT at this stage. Only sharing will stop and you can start again.
Okay.
Don't close the PPT.
Sure.
Okay, I'm leaving the meeting.
Okay, fine. I'm just back on the same. Sorry, somebody said something.
Yeah, I want to say wow for every damn thing actually you're showing, but I think I'll too much, so that's why I'm keeping mute.
Okay, fine. I'll just move it. So this is, I just touched upon the ethical issues. It's a much bigger topic. I don't think I have answers for it. Again, the ethics will keep on evolving in that sense. So something which I probably was doing 2 years back, now I'll say I'll not do it because of ethics, or something might change because typically the flash photography even for birds. I was surprised actually in Europe and even Kenya and all, people don't consider that as a problem. They use flash. And for us in India, we have been always from day one, people have been telling us not to use flash for birds. For macro, yes, because there's no other choice. But for birds, mammals, you never use flash. But it's always a subjective thing. I don't think anybody will have a right or wrong answers here. Some of the macro clicks I'm showing here. The background picture here is a Anjan tree, again from Fansad. It's actually very colorful. I've just blurred it here because I wanted to use only as a background. But it's very colorful. These are, I think, dried flowers. This is not the actual flowering season. After it had dried. First one is from Banduk Pumping Station, Mumbai. It's a small salmon or a butterfly. It's actually laying eggs. If you see the portion here, there are already 5 eggs. Sixth one, it's in the process of laying. So that's where the butterflies lay the eggs, just below the leaves. And it's a commonly in the common on from the road itself. When there's not way inside in the jungle, it's right there on the road, and it was laying eggs there.
Uday, which was that flower tree you showed earlier? There was a question.
Anjan.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Then these are painted grasshoppers. This again, I mean, typically the macro photos that I have are from macro tours, but this is not. We were in Great Run of Kutch, Bhuj, and during morning and afternoon safaris, between that we were at a resort, and then somebody said there are nice pair of painted grasshoppers. Why don't you have a macro lens? Why don't you go there? Typically, I go for even for birding or mid trips. I carry the macro lens, so you never know when such occasions will come. And the milkweed plant is typically very favorite for these grasshoppers. If there's a milkweed plant, if the right season, you are bound to see them. Even in Banduk pumping stations, you see them in lots. But seeing them as a mating pair is another good thing. So this, if you see, even at that small scale, there's so many colors. So that insect world is, I think, way less explored compared to any of the mammals and birds. There's so much of variety that it fascinates, and every time it fascinates. This again is not from macro tour. The next photograph, the scorpion. This we had seen in Ranthambore. So luckily on that tour we had a macro expert, and this again not in the jungle. This is in the resort that we were staying. One of the rooms actually had in this close vicinity this spider. So luckily we saw it before actually it could hurt anyone. But that's the scorpion. You can see even its sting very clearly there. This was in 2017 among my first trips. I had seen this jumping spider. So you actually see the 2 primary eyes, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, there's 6 those secondary eyes that you see over there. So these are all very small creatures, and you have to keep on observing every plant, not just what you see in the top, even sometimes below the leaf, small leaf. You keep watching, and that's where you find such beauties. Okay, the next one that I'm showing is a potter wasp with eggs, and this is not in the jungle at all. I had been to a relative's place in Pune for a family function, and we were sitting in their balcony, which was a relatively big balcony. It had some plants in it, and I kept seeing a potter wasp going behind a tree or a plant. I mean, this is the green background that you see in this picture is actually a leaf, a big leaf, and it kept going there. So I got curious, and when I looked around, I actually could see this is a nest that is built, so intricately made. And if you look closely, I don't know whether some of you are seeing it on a mobile screen, it is visible, but in each of the compartment, there's actually egg inside. So I was really fascinated to see that egg. And if you look at it, this particular portion of that nest, I think it is closing. So the eggs are kept there, so it will gradually, one by one, it will close all of it, so that it will hatch, and then when it comes out, the babies will come out from there. The only bad part that I did actually over there was, obviously people I mean the my relatives had seen me photographing, but I told them what it was. The moment they came to know there's a potter was inside the house, said no, we'll clean that off, and I don't know what happened later, but I should probably have kept it as a secret rather than telling it to others. That's a lesson for me actually. Okay, caterpillars. These are moth caterpillars that I'm showing. It's so interesting. In fact, I mean, I'm probably not doing much of macro photography, but whatever that I've done, the moths are so varied, so much of variety, so many colors, that it was difficult for me to choose one or two of it. So, but I've just taken two samples, and first one, the top one is a hawk moth caterpillar. Again, if any of the experts are there, probably people can tell which hawk moth caterpillar. But as far as I know, this is the hawk moth caterpillar, and the one below down is the fruit piercing moth caterpillar. Those colors are so fascinating. In fact, the top one, the hawk moth caterpillar, I also have one which is green in color, similar to what the leaves or the branch that you see here, that color. One thing, the next photo that I'm showing, I could see that only because the right expert was with me. It's a stick insect, and just because I'm telling you, showing a photograph, we can identify, yes, it's a insect, it's not a stick. It because it has those legs and it is holding the stick. But otherwise, if you see it in isolation, or if you're not aware that there are stick insects, you would easily consider that as another twig of the tree here, the branch here. And here, if you're seeing it only as a small picture, but in that jungle, when you see along with that all the background, it's impossible actually to even know that this could be an insect. At least for me, it was revelation. Then last year I actually went to, in addition to the birding or animal tours, one tour to Kars for flowers and plants. And that also another interesting topic. I think all of us at least should make one trip to Kars if it has not already been made. And if that happens, then probably you'll go every year. But at least one we should make. So these are the ceropegias, the typical ceropegia flowers. In Marathi, it is called Kandil Pushpa because of that typical shape that you see at the top. The interesting part of these species is that they're not insectivorous. They don't catch the insects. But for pollination, their pollens actually is below in this bulbous portion here that you see. It's over there. And there is no way for the insects to directly hit or reach there. So they have to enter through this channel. If you see there in the top, there is opening. Through that, it gets in. And the structure inside is quite hairy. I'll just try to show zoomed photo. See here, if you see, I'm just showing it. Those hairs are structured in such a way that insect can actually go in, but it can't easily come out. So it goes in, it gets a nectar at the bottom, does that pollination happens, but it has to remain there till the flowering is over. I mean, that's probably for the day the flowering is there, and the night it will fall off. So when the flower falls off, then the hairy structure or the hairs will become soft, and the insect can come out. That's the only way the pollination happens in these type of plants. Uh, one sad part here is that typically the insects, not in all cases, but there are cases where the insects actually get shocked because it is trapped inside, and it might die in that scenario. So that's a sad part, and that's probably where the pollination process also is very difficult for these plants. So it's becoming rare. In fact, it's becoming rare and rare because of these two things. One is the insect catching or insect dying in that process. Second is the habitat loss. These are very specific. So very specific set of insects can pollinate these plants, and they are most of the time specific to that area. Sometimes it is even specific only to that particular portion of say mountain or branch that sort of thing. So it's very difficult, and there are cases where even people like us who are enthusiastic about nature, they think it is a rare plant, so therefore we should nurture it, and therefore some of them actually cut the plant here with the intention that they'll grow it at their home. It's not possible. These plants will never grow anywhere else other than where they are actually, and there are most of the places they are at the edge of certain cliffs, because that's a niche. That's the only where they will be able to flourish. So just a request from the experts who I have gone with, that even if you are very enthusiastic, this is rare, don't try to raise it somewhere other. So don't try to take it out and then grow it in our garden, and those sort of things are not possible for any of the Ceropegias. There are some 28 odd Ceropegia varieties that are seen in India all over. I've seen only 5 in CAS. These are 3, there are 2 others. Okay, next one is actually an insectivorous. It's Drosera indica. See, it looks so beautiful, those colors, but the red portions that you see over here, they are kind of sticky. So the insect, when it comes in contact, it actually gets stuck to that tree, and then they'll suck out all the nutrients from the insect. So this is insectivorous, but the Ceropegias are not. Again, the flower, these are, in this picture you see them big, but they're very small. There's hardly 1 or 2 centimeters in length. The entire structure is probably 2 by 2 centimeters. That's small it is. Coming to some of the moments that I was actually, I'll say, lucky to capture in various parts, various trips that I made. The background picture is again from Africa. The wildebeest moving on the evening sun. The sun is setting, and nice coloration on the sky there. Okay. First picture that I'm showing is Cheetah Brothers cheetah obviously has to be Africa. There's no cheetah in India. So yeah, these are, their name was Emani Brothers. They were 7-year-old. That is the information that we got from the guide there. The bottom portion that you see, they're actually made a kill of a wildebeest baby. Must be a newborn baby. That's what our guess was. Probably born the previous night, and then they were having a meal out of it. The unfortunate part was the mother was actually standing. We could see her standing at some distance. I mean, that's a jungle. That's a part of the jungle. So obviously you can't help it much. If the newborn would not have died, probably these two would have gone without food that day. But the interesting part is the upper portion. So if you see here, they were in hurry, and literally in half an hour. And again, ours was the only vehicle around, so we had a full view of that particular scene. So we could go around, we could see it from different angles, different light, whatever that we wanted to try, we could, because we were the only one there. After 30-40 minutes, they sat down and they actually cleaned each other. So we were curious, I mean, what is the reason why they're doing it that way? I mean, just clean up is one part, let you clean it up. But apparently, if they don't clean, the blood could be smelled by hyenas. That also could be dangerous, or for that matter, lions or any of the other. But cheetahs, although they look bigger in size compared to hyenas, they are probably the weakest in all the African hunters. So if there's a leopard, if there's a lion, or even hyenas, or even wild dogs, they'll all chase away these, or in fact, they will attack on these as well. So that's where the first thing that they did after eating up, they cleaned each other. Okay, I had shown the photo of lioness actually making a kill of a warthog and pulling along all the other pride members. So I'll just show you how close they were. It didn't start so close. They actually were at far, and then from there she kept pulling it, and this is where she dropped us. There were vehicles so close. I mean, our vehicle obviously is on this side, but there are two there, and maybe 2-3 others on the other side. So the lions are so close. I mean, you see this another lioness over here. She's so close to that vehicle. So that's how close you can get sometimes. If you're lucky, you get to witness the real life, how the jungle works, how they get food, and how things work there. The next one again is another interesting incident that we saw. These are two giraffes, and they're actually fighting, necking as it's called, because they use their necks to fight. And if you see this small portion here, like a horn, it's not horn, that called something else. I keep forgetting the term, but they're like horn-like structure. They're a little hard, and they use that to hit the other giraffe. That's the way they fight. Again, I mean, these are not brutal fights. They will have few blows here and there, and then they'll disperse. So I don't know how it gets decided who won, but they probably have their own mechanism. In very rare cases that we heard from the guides, that the neck can break if the impact is so powerful, then the neck can break. But that's very rare. This fight is from our own big one, very very own big one. So these are two gray herons. They're fighting. Couple of days back, I had shared a gray heron picture as well in the same series. I mean, not these ones, but on the same in the same waters. The right side one that you see is actually coming in breeding. If you see the color of the legs and the beak, it is turning pinkish or reddish. That's a sign that it is getting into breeding. But probably even the one on the left is starting to breed. So you see their crest, nicely colored, the hair and all. And it was again an interesting fight. So it went on for a few minutes, then they separated. But after 10-15 minutes, again, I mean, I'm not 100% sure whether they were the same two individuals or some other two, but it appeared that these two were fighting again. This is from Mangalajodi. Again, this is a clubbed picture. On the left side, this speciality of this area, Mangalajodi wetlands, is the black-headed ibis or the white ibis actually kills a lot of snakes over there. They make snake kill, and interesting fact is they are the ones only who make the kills, and these kites will actually snatch it from there and then they run away. Not just kites. In fact, what he heard was that even the gray herons are powerful than the black-headed ibis, so even gray herons will steal it from them. In this scenario here, if you see the left portion, the kite has actually attacked directly. The hapless ibis had no choice. I mean, it just dropped it on the ground. There was no fight. I mean, it just dropped it. That's all. And then on the right side, you see it is moving away with the snake. And the unfortunate part was that during the day we kept seeing the ibis catching the snakes and the kites running with it. It was common feature. So probably if the ibis catches 10 snakes, maybe it gets to it only 1 or 2. Rest all are snatched by the others. Again, I mean, I had shown one picture earlier where you have to make pictures out of the opportunities that you have. Not every time you will get the moments that I had shown it in the earlier slides. Sometimes you were not lucky. For example, this particular picture that I'm going to show is from Bandhavgarh. We had photographed the tiger, but after some time it moved further inside into the grassland, and it was very far from us. So there was no way we could, whatever zoom lens that we would have used, we could go anywhere near to the tiger. So, I mean, the option then was don't go for the tiger picture, but show something like this. It's a habitat shot. You see the tiger, you also see the prey, the spotted deers, and you can also make out that the spotted deers are alert. They had seen the tiger. Of course, they had seen the tiger, but you can make out on the picture as well that they're alert. So some of them might still be grazing, but others are alert. They're looking for the tiger. In fact, as we saw it that day, the tigress actually made one attempt moving towards him, but then she realized probably this is an open jungle, hardly any chance for her to hide, and so she didn't bother much. All these deers kept on grazing, and the tiger went on its way. But I just wanted to show it because even though tiger in this picture is hardly maybe 1 or 2% of the overall picture, but it gives that impact because you see the jungle, you see the grassland, you see the prey, and as well as the tiger. So that's what I thought probably is an interesting part of it. The next one I'm going to show is sleeping tiger. Okay, whoever has gone in the jungles, they know that typically in the summer months, if you go, the tigers like to lie in water ponds, water pools. Wherever they see water, they will try to remain there, and they can do it for hours. So there are times when you see a lion sleeping kind of close to us, maybe some 20 odd feet, but it's not making any movement. So your choices are, I mean, you can wait in the hope that the tiger probably will wake up and then show some movements, or you just move out, try to find some other opportunity, some other tiger or some other mammal or something, some birds. But sometimes, I mean, if you are ready, you get lucky. So this is one picture. See, if you see here, the tiger has actually opened an eye and looking at us. So it's sleeping. I mean, it continued to sleep. Even after this, it just closed the eyes and then slept. But that's just one what you say, window where I could get to see the open eye. So I thought, although the tiger picture as such is not interesting, but this particular phase where it is showing just that one eye was interesting. Again, I mean, if you are ready with your camera, that's when you can catch certain things, because these are not things which can be predicted. So you just have to be ready. That's all. Another peafowl I'll show. People dance. Of course, it looks really nice. In fact, more than photograph, if you can take a video, that is even nicer. But sometimes, not sometimes, a lot of times when I've seen the peafowl dancing, it is not in the open grassland. It typically happens behind some trees or behind some bushes. So you don't see the entire thing together. I mean, the whole of their feathers, they're not seen at the same time. So sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you get that, but most other times you don't. But sometimes you get such opportunities. It has come to a point where it is actually closing its all feathers, but that also could look good. I mean, it is not entirely closed, so therefore you see some spread, and it is relatively open in this scenario, because this particular series I couldn't get the full when in so clear. It was always surrounded by other peafowls, peahens, so we couldn't get any clearer picture than this. This was the only one that I could get clear, but the feathers were not spread completely here. Sometimes you want to show some part of it. For example, I'll just show the photograph here. See, this was the same dusky eagle owl that I had shown you, the two of them earlier. But in this photo, if you see, the eyelid is half open and half closed. And there's a pink color that you see here. That is what I wanted to show. So therefore, rather than showing the entire bird, I've shown a different crop wherein you would be able to see the pink portion. I can see some of you are seeing it on mobile screen, probably not be able to see the blue color, the pink color here. I'm just trying to, okay, here I've just zoomed it further just for the people using mobile screen. Okay, of course, it is too much zoomed. It is actually not now the optical zoom, it's a digital zoom. So the picture is not clear, but I just want to show that pink color. So idea is basically sometimes you want to not show the entire bird here, but I just wanted to focus on a particular part, and therefore I'm using a different crop, not showing the entire bird. Sometimes you may miss certain opportunities, but you still like the photo. So this is one example. I like the photo, I still like the photo, but the leg portions are cut. It could still be a good image. I mean, a lot of people actually liked it. I mean, some of my friends called me specially to tell this is a nice picture, but I know the legs are cut. So why that happened? Okay, this is from Big One. This is a pallid harrier. Uh, Harrier actually was sitting or perched at that location for decent amount of time, and we had taken photographs of it perched there. So then I thought probably I'll just zoom in and take some close-up pictures of it, maybe the face portion and that sort of thing. That's where I was. So I had focused, and then suddenly it made a movement. In that hurry, I forgot to zoom out the camera and took pictures as is. So that's where I cut the legs. But I still found the picture presentable, so that's why I'm showing it. And again, I mean, these kind of scenarios will keep on happening anywhere, everywhere. So the learning from that was that whenever I want to shoot a particular object, bird or whatever portion that I want to shoot, it shouldn't be zoomed so much that we are only seeing whatever that I want to present. It should at least be 20% on each side, more 20% area more on each side, because most of the time, I mean, most of our cameras are at least 20 megapixel, 24 megapixel, or maybe more some cases. So you can crop portion that you need. So it's not necessarily that every time you have to uh, final photo has to be there in the camera as is. That's of course a good thing. Experts probably would go with that. But for amateurs, for people like me who are learning still, we try to keep some portion more than what you are actually intend to show. But that gives you some flexibility, because sometimes a bird makes movement, sometimes the animal moves suddenly on the left or right, and there's a chance that you otherwise might miss, like what I'd shown the earlier picture. You might miss those legs. Had I be focused on not just the bird but some portion around it, I would not have missed that. But that's a learning that I have, I mean, of course. Okay, the background picture that you see here, it's again a wildebeest, and the colored portions that you see here, these are actually not its eyes. I mean, just when I saw the picture for the first time, I had thought those are the eyes, but it's not. It's the horns and the ears, the portion between that. There's a light coming from both these, and they're so well placed that it giving the appearance of an eye, but these are not the eyes. Coming to question, a lot of people have asked me in the past as well in terms of what camera to choose. And again, I'm not getting into the debate of whether Canon or Nikon or Sony or Fuji or whatever. That's another topic altogether. But just a simple question whether to go for a DSLR, whether go for point and shoot, or in some cases even mobile phone. People use mobile phone also quite effectively in cases. So this is again is not an expert opinion. These are the things that I have learned from my experience, or I've seen or learned from people who are around me, those who are using DSLR or not using DSLR, so and so forth. So first question, how much weight can you handle? So for typical scenario, the DSLR and the birding lens that I carry, weight comes to around 3 kgs. So again, 3 kgs per se, if you just hold the camera, it won't mean much, or you won't feel much of it. But if you are carrying that for hours, typically for birding tours, you go 3 hours, 4 hours trails continuously. If you are carrying it on your shoulder, you can feel the weight. I mean, it becomes you feel like it is like 10 times the weight that you are actually carrying. So that's a question that you have to answer for yourself. I mean, there's no right or wrong here. Second is picture quality. If you are hell bent on having the best picture quality, then you have no choice. Then you have to go for DSLR. In a certain scenarios, when there's a good light, even point and shoot will give you excellent pictures, no doubt about it. But if you want it, the picture quality for all scenarios, low light, fast shutter, everything, I think DSLR is the only option. Just to give you the idea, the major difference from in any of these things, DSLR, point and shoot, or in mobile cameras, the sensor size is what makes a difference. So full frame cameras, the first picture that you see here is 36 mm by 24 mm. That's a full frame. That's what again, even within DSLR, there are full frame cameras, there are crop sensor cameras. What I'm using, it's a crop sensor camera. But full frame cameras will have this kind of sensor. And the one which I'm using, APS-C Canon, is this. So it is still smaller than your full frame camera, but much bigger than your mobile camera. So the last one is actually a mobile camera. Typically, this is what the sensor is. So when you say 24 megapixel camera, that 6,000 pixels this way, 4,000 pixels this way, that's a distribution. So you get it here. And if you say 24 megapixel mobile camera, then that 6,000 by 4,000 will be in this portion only. So these pixels will be, the area for each pixel is so small. And because of that, see, I mean, ideally it would be okay even if you have this kind of scenario, 6,000 and 4,000, so small pixels, you'll probably get more clarity. But what happens is, whatever technology that you use, if the pixels are so near to each other, the light from one pixel spills over to the other, and that's where you see the little bit of blur or not the tack sharp picture that you see. That's a problem. So if you have good light, then even the mobile camera will give you good. So for example, if you want to take a group photo, mobile camera is the best, because then it gives you decent photographs. Everybody is in focus. In terms of DSLR, you probably have more issues there. I mean, what settings to use, etc., etc. Mobile camera works best over there. That's about picture quality. So the quality is completely like one-to-one relationship with the sensor size. Another factor that you need to consider is the flexibility. In case of point and shoot, the same camera used for all occasions. You go for birding trip, use the same. So if you have a P900 or a P1000, you can go for even shorebirds, waterbirds. You can go for forest birding. You can, if you want to do it family function, family shoot, you can do all of that with just a single camera. You don't have to change lenses, nothing. So that kind of flexibility, if you want, point and shoot is the best answer. But for DSLR, for every occasion, you need a different lens. So you have to carry all that. I mean, not just the weight that you carry of the camera and lens, but also of the camera bag that you carry along. Plus, one other factor that I've seen is if you are the only one who are using the camera, it becomes easier because then you know how much weight you can handle and how much deep that you want to go into, whether you want auto mode or you want manual mode, and those sort of things you can easily handle for your own. But if the same camera is being used by multiple members of the family, then it is better to go with something which works well in auto mode. So mobile or point and shoot, that's a best answer for that kind of scenario. Again, these are all based on whatever that I have learned for me as well as for people who are using it. So there's no per se quote unquote expert answer to this. It's just my take on what camera to use. So there are cases where I have actually recommended people to go with point and shoot, P900, P1000, that sort of thing, rather than going for DSLR, depending on the requirement. If you are specific, you are very keen on the quality, you are very keen on exploring things, yeah, then probably DSLR is the best option. Within that, whether Canon, whether Nikon, whether Sony, mirrorless, etc., etc., those are bigger questions. So we're not even getting into any of that over here. So I think that's what I want to say. That's just the last slide that I want to show in terms of collages that I use. This again is a post-processing Photoshop that I use most of the time for presentation. So sometimes you want to present some things little differently. So here in this case, the Blackwing Stilt, I wanted to show how it actually lands. So it's like rather than showing 4 different pictures, I have created a collage here to show how it lands. So how the legs are folded, how it spreads it and lands on the ground. So I thought collage was the best way to present this. This one probably most of you have seen. I had recently made. Somebody requested to make the collage for shrikes that you see in India. This is not the complete list. There are other shrikes also, but these are the ones that I had seen or I have seen. Okay, another collage for the pied kingfisher. Pied kingfisher actually is famous for having that hovering movements. So it will hover on top of any pond or any water body, sees the fish movement and then jump for it. So it is interesting actually to see the movements. And what happens is the movements are so fast that you need much. I mean, in terms of shutter speed, you need some 1/2000, 1/3000 seconds kind of shutter speed. Again, although it is hovering, it's not exactly at one point. So it keeps moving maybe few centimeters here and there within that. So capturing tack sharp picture of that, it becomes very difficult. So instead of focusing on that, I have relatively good pictures, but I have combined them together so as to show the entire moment. So how how there are different poses which it remains in that hovering position. So I just wanted to show that. I thought probably collage is the best way to show it. This again is from Chiplun, Nandu's place, the OD caves. One on the left is female and one on the right is the male. And so I wanted to show that male female together. So that's why I combined this picture just to show, although they are not actually sitting together. This is kind of a collage. It's a composite picture. So kept two images taken separately and then put together, just for presentation purpose, to show the differences between male and female. The second one, again, this is a little older. These are the kingfisher that I had seen by then. After that, I had also seen the blue-eared and the stock-billed. So they're not added here. But this is to show the type of kingfishers that we've seen, that we see in India. Again, I mean, there are three more. The third one I have not. Sorry, four more. The other two that I have not seen yet.
Uday, before you go further, wait on this tiger picture. Let us log out and log in because we have lots of questions also. So this will be our concluding session.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. So this was anyways last slide. Yeah.
Correct. I know. That's why I said, everybody, please log off and log in again, because I'm sure you have lots of questions and we'll get opportunity to ask this question, and Uday will agree to answer those. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Lightroom. I not only keep the photos in particular folders that way, but every photo gets tagged. For example, if there's a blue-bearded beater, I tag it as blue-bearded beater. In addition to that, what location? So that location gets tagged. Anything else that I wanted to tag, I tag it accordingly. For example, human faces. Each face, wherever, I mean, family photos typically, the faces are also tagged. So if I want to search a particular person or a particular bird, I can go based on the search in that catalog. So that kind of thing is possible. Yeah.
Okay, Sharon had a couple of questions. Sharon, you can go ahead and ask.
Yeah, so I had one question regarding, is there any park where an offbeat park that you, or reserve that you traveled in the last few years, which you found very surprising in terms of the sightings that you got?
I liked every park that I went to so far. So luckily that was good. But I was surprised. See, Africa was a wonder. So here in India, you have to actually look for mammals or birds. Africa, they'll just keep on coming in front of you. At least Kenya, where I had been. So in that sense, it amazed me. But I was expecting it. So because, I mean, when I went, a lot of people had already talked about so many of these things. So obviously I knew. So in that sense, I was not surprised. But yes, I was still amazed.
Viba, I think most of your questions were answered. Angela, you have a question? Go ahead.
Hi, Uday.
Hi.
Hi. The enriching session, and I liked it very much. The overall presentation was very good. I had a
Thanks.
question like when you are using Lightroom, I mean, is this a software through which you are removing the noise? I mean, when you are taking shots in low light.
No, for removing noise, I use the Topaz denoise. So that comes as a add-on. It can run with Lightroom as well as Photoshop.
Okay.
But
After
there
that,
are other
you
softwares as
are
well. But yeah, I use Topaz.
okay.
Sorry.
After that, you are just enhancing the color or something like that. I mean, before you are removing the noise and then the color enhancing or other editing.
Correct. Exposure and other things. But again, color is one area where I can see I need a lot of improvement, because lot of times when I discuss it with the experts, get the feedback in terms of certain hues or certain shades of colors as they should look natural probably is not appearing in certain photos, mainly because I'll have to still learn that. I mean, the in terms of showing the right colors.
One, you need to remove that clock. I need to change the battery. Uday, hi.
Yeah.
I would like to know which is your favorite photo, if there is one. I know there are lots and lots of it that you do. And why?
Second question becomes obvious because there is no favorite photo, so there's no why answer. I mean, if since you asked the question, I probably started looking back into my memories whether there is anything of that sort. I've probably not. I some pictures I like, and sometimes I get a feeling that I like it, but probably people may not like it, so I don't share it. But there are pictures that I like when I find it very good, but I get a feeling that it's just because I'm liking it doesn't necessarily mean a good picture or not. So such cases are there, but otherwise I like almost all the pictures that, I mean, at least those that are present. I mean, there are, you typically on a trip you go with thousands of pictures, 70% of it will get deleted, but yeah, the remaining ones I like all of them.
Thanks.
Anybody else has a question? I don't see any written questions, so please go ahead and ask, or any comments.
Can I just thank Uday for not letting me go for
Oh,
grocery shopping. Uday, it was too good. I messaged Francis that I'll be attending for a while and then I have to go out, but I just couldn't
Oh.
leave it. It was too good.
wow. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Amish,
Yeah.
we could hear.
Hi, Vibha here. Thanks a lot
Yeah.
today. And thanks to Francis for organizing this.
Yeah,
So
in
this is
fact,
the
thanks all
first.
to Francis actually. Yeah.
So this is the first one I've attended, despite seeing so many messages on the group. So this is the first one. Finally, I managed to attend. It was really worth the while. Just one
Thanks.
thing, Uday, you said that
Yeah.
for removing noise, you use Topaz. Topaz what?
Right. Topaz denoise.
Acha, denoise. And what is used for color correction generally?
No, most of these things can be done by Lightroom or Photoshop both. So I
Okay.
don't do much of color correction. So I use Lightroom, but that is typically to change the exposures or highlights or shadows and all. But lights, colors I typically don't touch unless there's some specific comment saying there's a tinge scene, there's a lot of blue coloration
Yeah.
scene or orange, that sort of thing. But otherwise I don't touch it because I don't understand it.
Okay, so the free versions, there are free versions of Adobe software. So is that enough, or do you use a paid version?
I use the paid version,
Okay.
but there are a lot of not just, I mean, the kind of editing changes that I do, lot of free softwares will also be easily able to do it.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Any more
Thanks.
questions? Uday, in the meanwhile, you can see the thank you notes coming in the chat, because the chat will close after we end the session. So while we are answering, okay, please look at the thank you. Anybody else, any questions?
See the chat screen.
No more questions. Okay, Uday, everybody is thanking you for the wonderful session. I personally enjoyed it. It was wonderful to listen to your experience. Obviously, photographs are fantastic. Every photo I wanted to say awesome, but I didn't want to interrupt. Okay, but the experiences you shared and everything else, the ethics, etc., was very insightful. Thank you very much for the session. Everybody, thank you for joining, and
Thanks.
keep waiting.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All our memories got refreshed. Now we still can't wait to go back again.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Let's hope we can go soon.
Thank you for joining
Yeah,
and
we
waiting
should.
till now for 2 hours. Thank you very much, everyone,
Ah,
and
yeah. Thanks.
thank
Thanks,
you. We'll
everybody.
see you later. All right.
Sure. Thanks.